My brother drained Dad's retirement account. So I hired a forensic accountant. Now he's facing 5 years for elder fraud. He was always the one who knew how to charm a room. Kyle could smile through a lie so smoothly, people thanked him for deceiving them. From childhood, he'd been the golden boy. Good looks, an easy laugh, always with a joke on his lips and an excuse in his back pocket. I was the one with the clipboard, the schedules, the spreadsheets. I was the one who remembered Dad's prescriptions, who showed up when the assisted living nurse called at 2 a.m. because he'd slipped again in the bathroom. I was the one who signed the checks, balanced the accounts, refilled the pill bottles, and called the doctors. Kyle, on the other hand, was busy being busy, only ever appearing when there was an inheritance rumor or a birthday dinner. When Mom died, things shifted. Dad fell apart in slow motion. The man who once lectured us about compound interest now forgot where he'd put his phone in his own hand. I moved back into town, gave up my apartment, took a remote job so I could be closer. Kyle? He started calling more often, but only to ask about Dad's plans. Said things like, "Do you know what his will says?" And, "Shouldn't we talk about assets now just in case?" I should have known. I only caught it because I was trying to pay the new home health aid. I logged into Dad's online banking like I did every other Friday. The screen loaded slower than usual, like even the site was bracing for what I was about to see. I stared at the balance for a full 30 seconds before I let myself blink. Then I refreshed the page, hoping it was a glitch. $431.17. From $212,000 just 2 months ago. The transaction history was a blur of transfers, withdrawals, and charges that made no sense for a man who couldn't walk a block without help. A $1,900 charge to a luxury boutique in Miami. 4 ATM withdrawals in a single week, each for the maximum amount. A $10,000 wire to an unfamiliar account marked only by a cryptic name. K Solutions LLC. I didn't panic. Not outwardly. I took screenshots. I downloaded statements. I printed out everything. Then I called the bank and froze the account, told them Dad had been a victim of suspected fraud. They said they'd begin an internal investigation. I already knew what they'd find. When I confronted Kyle, he didn't even flinch. He leaned against his expensive new SUV, arms crossed over a designer jacket he didn't own 6 weeks ago. "I moved it for safekeeping," he said casually, as if he was talking about putting milk on a different fridge shelf. "You know how Dad is, he forgets everything. What if he'd given away his info to a scammer? I protected it." "By buying yourself a car?" I asked, not bothering to lower my voice. He shrugged. "It's complicated. You wouldn't understand how finance works." The arrogance in his tone didn't surprise me. Kyle had always relied on others assuming he was smarter than he was. He'd been faking competence since high school, riding on the back of charm and selective ignorance. But this time, he'd taken from Dad, from the man who sat in front of the TV every evening asking where Mom was, as if she'd just gone to the store. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just said, "All right." And then I hired Claire Morales. Claire wasn't what you'd expect. No horn-rimmed glasses or stiff demeanor. She wore jeans and a leather jacket to our first meeting, leaned back in her chair like she was listening to a podcast instead of hearing about felony-level financial theft. But she knew numbers the way surgeons know arteries. Efficient, clinical, unforgiving. I handed her a 3-ring binder packed with account records, login logs, bank statements, even screenshots of Kyle's social media posts flaunting his luck in Vegas. She asked questions, sharp ones, precise ones. She never once made the mistake of assuming this was a misunderstanding. "Elder financial abuse is a specific type of fraud," she said, flipping through the statements. "Harder to prosecute if the victim is alive and says he gave permission, but not impossible." Dad, of course, didn't remember authorizing anything. The few times I tried to bring it up, he just blinked and said, "Kyle handles the money now, right?" And smiled like that was a comforting thought. Claire went deeper than I ever could. She subpoenaed digital records, traced IP addresses on login sessions, matched purchase timestamps with Kyle's location history. She linked the K Solutions account directly to a burner account Kyle had opened a week before the first withdrawal. It was practically a blueprint for embezzlement. Then she filed the report with the district attorney. I thought maybe, just maybe, Kyle would get scared and give it back. I was wrong. He doubled down. Got a lawyer. Expensive, of course. and spun a story about how he was managing Dad's declining estate and had full permission. He even submitted a handwritten note from Dad claiming it was true. Claire got that handwriting examined. Forged. The DA didn't blink. Elder fraud is a quiet crime, but a serious one. When the indictment came down, Kyle looked confused, as if this was a prank, as if someone would step in and say, "Gotcha." But no one did, because this time, the truth didn't come with tears or shouting matches. It came with timestamps, wire trails, expert affidavits, and clear evidence that Dad never saw a dime of his own money after Kyle got access. He's facing 5 years now, minimum. When the detective came to talk to Dad, gently, carefully, he just looked tired. He blinked slowly and said, "Why would Kyle do that?" Over and over, as though the answer might change if he asked it enough times. And then he looked at me and said, "Thank you." That was it. No big speech, just 2 words. But I saw something settle behind his eyes. Relief, maybe, or shame he couldn't name. The rest of the family called me dramatic, said I was overreacting, that it's just money. But none of them were there when I found Dad crying in the hallway because he didn't remember where he was. None of them got the calls at 2 a.m. or had to explain to the pharmacist that, no, he couldn't drive himself anymore. They see Kyle, and they see charm. I see a man who sold his father's peace of mind for a Vegas weekend in a sports car. I don't do revenge. I do spreadsheets. I do paper trails. I do notarized affidavits and sealed indictments. I do justice with evidence, and I'm not done yet. The preliminary hearing was set for a rainy Tuesday, the kind of rain that seeps into your shoes and stays with you the rest of the day, heavy and stubborn. I sat on the worn wooden bench outside the courtroom, a thick envelope of financial exhibits on my lap, while Kyle sauntered in with his lawyer and a too bright smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked thinner than usual, not in a way that suggested he was dieting, but in that gaunt, stretched way people get when they stop sleeping well. His jaw was tighter, his movements twitchy, like he was waiting for someone to tell him this was all a misunderstanding that could be wiped clean with a few apologies. His attorney, a polished man with a deep voice and a habit of overpronouncing words like allegedly and mischaracterization, tried to get the case dismissed before it even began. Claimed the money wasn't stolen, just relocated. Argued that Dad had given verbal consent, never mind that Dad could barely remember what day it was. Claire had anticipated this defense and prepared a set of statements from Dad's doctors attesting to his cognitive decline. She even had timestamps from Kyle's own text messages, several of which flat out admitted that Dad didn't really know what was going on. The judge reviewed the documents with a flat expression. She said nothing for a long minute, then set the date for trial. Kyle flinched. The confidence he'd worn like a shield cracked just a little. Back at Dad's care facility, things had taken a quieter turn. He was no longer asking about Kyle as often, and when he did, his tone was softer, uncertain. I didn't tell him about the court date. I didn't tell him about the deposition request either. There were limits to what his mind could process now. He still smiled when I brought him lemon cookies and helped him with the TV remote. He still remembered my name. That was enough. Meanwhile, Claire and I kept working. Every time we thought we'd found everything, she'd find one more hidden account, one more suspicious transfer. The man had scattered Dad's savings across 4 different banks, each under some flimsy business name. The most infuriating part wasn't even the money. It was how sloppy he was. Like he thought he was immune. Like no one would ever dig far enough to notice. We met with the prosecutor weekly. She was sharp, no nonsense, and had a look in her eye that told me this wasn't her first case involving family betrayal. She broke down the strategy piece by piece. The key wasn't just proving the theft. It was proving Kyle knew Dad was vulnerable, that he exploited it, that he wasn't confused or mistaken, but deliberate. That meant evidence showing intent, emails, transaction patterns, changes to account beneficiaries. Claire produced an email Kyle sent to a friend a few days after the first big withdrawal. It read, "Finally got control of the old man's stash. Time to start living." That line alone was damning. The friend, when interviewed, confirmed the message was real, and that Kyle had bragged about managing Dad's finances to his advantage. A week before the trial, Kyle tried to contact me. He showed up at my apartment uninvited, standing outside the door with a bottle of juice and an expression that swung between guilt and arrogance. I didn't open the door. I just watched him through the peephole as he knocked again and said, "Come on, we're family. You don't have to do this." That phrase, "you don't have to do this," sat wrong with me for days. As if I'd chosen betrayal. As if my actions were the problem, not the months of theft, the lies, the forged documents. The night before court, Claire and I sat in her office with takeaway containers and a whiteboard covered in arrows and dates. We went over our testimony, each piece of evidence, the order it would be presented. She told me, "The goal isn't to destroy him, it's to make the truth undeniable." In court, the first thing the prosecution did was display Dad's financial timeline, side by side, before Kyle's access and after. The difference was stark. Regular expenses, groceries, medical bills, utility payments. Then suddenly it turned into five-star hotels, cash withdrawals, and purchases that looked like a shopping spree on someone else's credit card. Kyle's lawyer objected to the emotional framing. The judge overruled. Then came the witness list. The nurse from Dad's facility testified first, calmly, clearly. She explained that Dad couldn't handle financial decisions without support, that he routinely forgot what day it was, that he often thought Mom was still alive. Her words weren't angry, they were matter of fact, honest. The defense tried to rattle her, asked if maybe Dad was just forgetful but competent. She answered with detailed logs from the medical staff, documenting his decline. Then Claire testified. She laid out every transaction, every breadcrumb that led from Dad's checking account to Kyle's private spending. The jurors were quiet, leaning forward. She spoke like a surgeon narrating an autopsy, precise, clinical, brutal. The defense tried to paint it as a misunderstanding, that Kyle had been reimbursing himself for errands, that he was managing expenses that I refused to cover. They showed photos of Kyle taking Dad out to lunch, trying to argue he was involved in his care. Claire countered with proof those lunches were rare, and paid for using Dad's card, even when Kyle was the one eating steak while Dad had soup. They brought in a forensic handwriting expert next. The note Kyle claimed Dad wrote, giving him permission to access everything, was a forgery. Confirmed. Multiple inconsistencies. Pressure patterns didn't match Dad's writing. The expert explained it clearly. The note was written by someone trying to mimic shaky handwriting but failed in key technical areas. Kyle's face tightened as the testimony went on. His leg bounced. He stopped making eye contact with the jury. Then it was my turn. I spoke calmly. I told them about Dad's routines, his medical history, how I found the missing money, how Kyle responded when I confronted him. I didn't dramatize. I didn't cry. I stuck to the facts, because the truth was enough. When I explained how Kyle shrugged off the missing $200,000 with a smile, I could see something shift in the room. Even the bailiff frowned. The final blow came when the prosecution submitted video footage from the boutique in Miami. It showed Kyle laughing with a salesperson, holding up a jacket that cost more than Dad's monthly care. The timestamp matched the charge to Dad's account. That moment hit harder than anything else. It was casual, carefree, a man spending someone else's security like it was pocket change. Kyle didn't testify. His attorney advised against it. He probably would have slipped, said something arrogant, something cruel, something that showed how little he thought of the entire process. Without him speaking, the defense had no soul, just a shell of excuses. After closing arguments, the jury went out. They didn't take long. When they returned, they didn't look at him. Guilty on all counts: elder financial abuse, wire fraud, forgery, sentence to be announced. Kyle's mouth parted slightly, like he was about to say something, but nothing came out. His lawyer whispered something to him. He didn't respond. Outside, reporters waited. I didn't speak to them. This wasn't about a headline. It wasn't about vindication. It was about making sure Dad would never be used again. The money was gone, but the truth was documented, and for once, Kyle couldn't charm his way out. Back at the care facility, Dad was asleep. I sat next to him, watched the slow rhythm of his breathing, and thought about the last 2 years, how easily it could have stayed hidden, how close Kyle came to walking away with everything. But he didn't, because I wrote everything down, because I paid attention, because someone had to, and this time, that someone was me. Sentencing was scheduled for the end of the month. Between the verdict and the hearing, the court ordered a full financial restitution report. Claire compiled it over the course of 4 days, detailing every dollar Kyle took, every account he moved it through, and every item he purchased. She submitted it in a 78-page document that outlined not just theft, but intent to defraud, conceal, and exploit a vulnerable elder. The final total was staggering: $214,643.17. Every expense was documented, traced, verified. No rounding, no estimations. Claire was exact. The judge wanted numbers. She gave them facts. Kyle remained out on bail while the court decided how long he'd serve. He tried once more to reach out, this time through our cousin Melissa. She called out of nowhere, asked if I could let it go now that he'd been found guilty, said he was really sorry and wanted to make it right. But nothing she said came with any plan to return the money. No payment schedule, no discussion of accountability, just vague talk of remorse, as if feeling bad was a form of restitution. I hung up. On the morning of sentencing, the courtroom was quieter than usual. No press this time. Just the attorneys, the judge, a few observers, and me. Kyle sat at the defense table looking like a man trying to seem composed while holding back the urge to run. His lawyer whispered something in his ear. He didn't nod. He didn't move. When the judge entered, the room stood. Once seated, she didn't delay. She went through the case summary, her voice steady and direct. She acknowledged Kyle's lack of prior criminal history, his claims of family conflict, and his supposed efforts to protect his father's assets. Then she read through the forensic findings, the doctor's statements, and the witness testimonies again, briefly, but with clarity. Then she looked at Kyle. "You abused access," she said. "You manipulated a vulnerable man. You falsified documents. You treated your father's savings like a personal allowance. This is not just fraud, it is betrayal." Then she sentenced him to 5 years in state prison, no parole before 3 years served. Restitution in full, with wage garnishment applied once he was eligible for work within the facility labor program. Any unpaid balance would follow him post-release. His lawyer attempted one last motion for a reduced sentence, but it was denied on the spot. I didn't cheer. I didn't react. I just stood quietly as Kyle was escorted out the side door, wrists bound, mouth shut. I went home afterward and opened the last drawer of Dad's old filing cabinet, the one that held the documents no one had touched in years. I found the original power of attorney paperwork, the old savings account ledgers, the pension deposits from before Mom passed. All of it neat and orderly, the way Dad used to keep his life. It hit me then how far things had drifted, how much time had been lost. But I also knew it wasn't too late to restore some part of what was broken. 2 weeks later, the restitution payments began. The first check was small, issued from the state's inmate labor account, a symbolic gesture more than a meaningful reimbursement. But it was something, a signal that the damage had not gone unnoticed. Claire arranged for future payments to be routed into a separate trust account I'd set up for Dad's ongoing care. The money wasn't enough to replace what was taken, but Dad was stable now. The care home had renewed his insurance plan for another year. The nurse staff knew him well, treated him with respect, and he still had good days, ones where we played cards and he called me by name without hesitation. One afternoon, after a long walk through the facility garden, he sat beside me and asked, "Where's Kyle been?" The question came gently, not accusing, not expectant. Just a name, drifting up like a thought from somewhere half buried. I told him the truth, but in the simplest way. "He did something wrong, Dad. He's paying for it." He didn't ask more. He nodded, then looked down at his hands, resting in his lap. "You always took care of things," he said. Then he changed the subject to his favorite baseball team and asked if they were still losing. Later that week, I closed out the last joint account Dad and Kyle had shared. The bank teller asked if I wanted to keep a record. I said no. That history didn't need preserving. What mattered was the trail we'd followed, and the fact that, for once, it ended where it should. Claire moved on to another case, a complex trust fraud involving a wealthy estate and a scheming nephew. She emailed occasionally, usually with updates about new laws that made prosecuting elder abuse easier. I appreciated that she kept me in the loop, but I didn't need more battles. This one was done. The rest of the family, the ones who called me dramatic, quieted down after the sentencing. Melissa sent a text a month later that said, "I didn't know the full story. I'm sorry." I didn't reply. There wasn't anything left to say. I took the time to reorganize Dad's life. changed his power of attorney to a professional fiduciary, updated his healthcare proxy, built a new budget. Every month I reviewed expenses, kept things tight, made sure his prescriptions were ordered ahead. The peace that returned wasn't loud or satisfying. It was quiet, steady, the way things should have been from the start. Kyle never apologized, not directly, not in writing, not through the court. He served his sentence quietly. I never visited. He never reached out again after the conviction. I'd be lying if I said I didn't sometimes think about what I'd say if he did, but that door had closed the day he chose his lifestyle over his father's dignity. Dad made it through another year. He turned 84 in spring. I brought lemon cookies and a photo album. We sat on the patio while he looked at pictures from 20 years ago, smiling at the ones with Mom, and occasionally naming people I didn't expect him to remember. He laughed at a picture of Kyle and me in matching sweaters, but when he got to the end of the album, he closed it and said, "We had a good family, huh?" I nodded and said yes, because we did, even if part of it broke. The past didn't get erased and the money didn't return in full. But the truth held. The silence that let Kyle operate was gone. He didn't get away with it. He didn't walk off into another scam, armed with charm and excuses. In the end, justice was delivered not with outrage but with evidence, not with revenge but with precision. And Dad was protected not just in theory but in practice. The story was over. Every document filed, every lie dismantled. And for once, nothing was missing.